as the Pacific Resilience, as well as the Pacific Resilience Partnership. So let me go on to our next slide. Just a few housekeeping matters, please. As you can see, we have our esteemed panelists and speakers here to the right. Just some general housekeeping matters. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom box to ask these questions ahead of time or during the panelist discussions. The panelists that are here will make every effort to answer the questions during the webinar. If, however, we're not able to do so because of time or other circumstances, we will compile a list of answers and resources that best address your questions moving forward. With that, I would just like to give a brief overview before I pass over to our ADB colleague, Stephen Goldfinch, for his opening remarks as well. So the Pacific Disaster Risk Knowledge Series is the reason why we're all here today. This is the first event out of 4. Here we are in August 2025. The overarching theme for this is strengthening the application of disaster and climate risk information in the Pacific. The core target audience for this webinar are really the users of climate and disaster risk information or knowledge in the Pacific Islands. This series will be a series of 3 online events in 2025, each with a maximum duration of 90 minutes, as per this one. And we are aiming to target for one in-person regional event, either in late 2025 or early 2026. The emphasis of this is really strengthening risk-informed decision-making. We all know that there is a lot of data and information out there that exists about the Pacific Islands, how this is being used, and if it's not, how can we best, make use of the important resources that we have out there. So these series will look at key topics. So the generation and application of disaster and climate risk insights, looking at understanding and the use of climate and risk information, embedding climate and disaster risk in policy, planning, and investment, ownership, capacity, and institutionalization, access, data, and sharing, tailoring risk information to end users, and the future application and innovation of such risk data and information. So just to another note is that each of these events that we have here will have a different focus. And these have been heavily informed by consultations with development partners as well as countries, as well as the outputs from a regional multi-hazard disaster risk assessment report that was commissioned by ADB in partnership with SPC. This first knowledge series event does focus on climate and disaster risk information for resilient development. So that is what we will be discussing for the next 90 minutes on this call. With that, I would like to quickly stop sharing my screen and pass over to Stephen Goldfinch, who is our representative today from the Asian Development Bank. He is the Senior Disaster Risk Management Specialist under the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department at ADB. Stephen, thank you so much for being with us here today, and over to you for your remarks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. It's nice to see lots of familiar faces. Bulavanaka, Malo Alele, Talofaloa, Mori, Kiorana, and Mabuhay, and a warm welcome to the first episode of the Pacific Disaster Risk Knowledge series. So as Rachel was saying, risk information is really a central part to building resilience in the Pacific. It's not only a tool for strengthening development planning and investment, but also an essential foundation for reducing poverty in high-risk areas. And I think without it, government and communities are left with limited ability to take action, to assess their risk, to prioritize resources, and ultimately to make those investments. So since the production of the regional risk assessments and country profiles under the Pacific Catastrophe Risk Assessment and Financing Initiative back in 2011, the Pacific has made significant progress. In recent years, we've seen some detailed subnational assessments. For example, the multi-hazard risk assessment for Loganville and Port Vila in Vanuatu back in 2016, Tongatapu in Tonga in 2021, and a climate vulnerability assessment in Fiji in 2018. And then there was the sea level rise impact study for the Marshall Islands in 2021. So these efforts are steadily improving our knowledge base. More recently, in 2022, we have new initiatives underway to update and refine the data required for reliable risk assessments. And this includes the local collection of asset data across multiple countries using regionally consistent standards, and the acquisition of high resolution elevation data, which is critical for accurate hazard and vulnerability mapping. So recognizing the need to share and apply these advances more widely, ADB and SPC convened the first Pacific Risk Knowledge Series in 2022. This platform is designed to bring together innovations, lessons, and opportunities in disaster and climate risk information, ensuring that they meet the needs of Pacific Island countries. So the recently completed Pacific Multi-Hazard Disaster Risk Assessment Landscape Study, which was jointly led by ADB and SPC's Geoscience, Energy and Maritime Division, shows that many programs are already underway to expand the application of climate and disaster risk information in planning and decision making. In parallel, there was the establishment of the Technical Working Group on Multi-Hazard Early Warning Systems and Risk Information under the Pacific Resilience Partnership, which provides a really strong institutional home to continue advancing this agenda with leadership from SPC, SPREP, IFRC, and UNDRR. So today's episode sets the stage for what's to come by unpacking what risk means, how it's defined, and why it matters for resilience and planning. The Pacific Risk Knowledge Series is supported by ADB's technical assistance, the Pacific Disaster Resilience Program, and developed in close collaboration with SPC and many of the organizations and development partners represented here today. So I warmly welcome you to the first episode of the series and encourage you not only to learn from the discussions, but also to share your insights and to contribute to the discussions that we're going to have. Together, we can build stronger demand for capacity for risk-informed decisions that drive a more resilient Pacific future. So with that, I wish everyone a great session, and I'll pass it back to Rachel.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for really setting the scene and for the remarks on behalf of ADB, and especially for highlighting the improving knowledge base that we're also trying to achieve as part of this series. So thank you so much for your time. We do understand that you're quite busy, so if you do have to leave halfway, it's totally fine. You're welcome to do so. You're welcome to stay for the whole session as well. So thank you again, Stephen, for those remarks. Now at this time, we would like to pass over to Litea Bikoto from the Pacific Community for her keynote speech on why risk information matters. She will be setting the scene, a foundation for us today, looking at what are the key components of risk assessment and why do they matter for planning and resilience. So Litea, thank you so much, and over to you.
Level, Rachel, thank you very much, Stephen, for actually starting us off so well. It's lovely to meet you here. Bulavanaka, everyone. We realized when we were putting this together was that we were probably going to be coming at it from different areas and different backgrounds. What we can agree to in the region is that the Pacific faces increasingly complex and compounding risks that probably have been underrated in previous iterations of risk assessments. Part of the reasons why the Pacific continues to be faced with these risks is, one, because of the sheer location of where we are, practically around the Pacific Ring of Fire, and for many of our countries, also situated within the cyclone belt. Pardon me. And of course, this means that our communities, our ecosystems that we rely on, our assets are all exposed to these wide range of hazards that we meet and face. For those of you who've been around, who are in the room, can probably appreciate that COVID threw a spanner in our traditional sense or traditional thinking around risk. And I'm glad to see that over time or since COVID, that there's been there's been greater acceptance around the range and the scale of hazards that the region actually is is exposed to. So geohazards that we saw in Vanuatu in December last year, environmental, chemical hazards, biological hazards, which includes COVID and the recent measles that a number of our countries have actually been exposed to, as well as dengue and some technological as well as societal. So what's the big deal? What's the big deal about risk information? What risk information in a nutshell actually allows us to do is to understand what hazards might actually occur in the spaces that we actually occupy. And these hazards are often influenced by other related hazards. If we take, for instance, an inundation event, pardon me, that's actually been the result of a tropical cyclone that's formed. And we're able to actually monitor these hazards either through observation networks that have been installed, in determining what type of hazard it is or the frequency, if the records are long enough, as well as the location. And often this information is provided by agencies that actually do the monitoring work, or is made available to them through scientific or statistical models. However, if we look back at history also tells us what hazards that we've also experienced. And some of this is also through traditional knowledge, and how these events have had a profound impact on our society as well, and not just the economy. And when we talk about what is exposed or who is exposed, what I'm actually referring to here are people, infrastructure, the ecosystems that they may rely on for food or for sustenance or livelihoods. There are actually things that we value, that we hold personal, that is either personal, that could be societal or have a cultural value, as well as a sectoral one. So that's two things that contribute to risk information. However, what we also do know is that not everything that is exposed is vulnerable. And so how do we determine that? If we think about vulnerability, if we were to take the example of infrastructure, this is determined by what it's constructed of or how it's constructed. Was this infrastructure, did it actually adhere to building codes? Was it actually constructed in the right place? And as we all know, that even people who live within the same area are often not affected in the same way by events or by hazards. So the susceptibility of our people and of our systems in being able to actually withstand some of these damages, or being able to actually, are exposed is vulnerable, is related to could be related to social and economic factors. Some of the planning decisions that are actually made, do they have prior access to services? And as we know, access to basic water and sanitation facilities often puts communities in a better stance to be able to deal with the day-to-day events, but also allow them to prepare if needed. So, and then I'm probably walking straight into the potential impacts. So when we think impacts, we often we can think about what we can actually anticipate. And what we can anticipate may occur under different conditions. So how are people in communities, how is the community infrastructure and the ecosystems that surround them affected by a hazard? What are the consequences that happen as a result? And are these consequences different pertaining to the area that we're talking about? Could the sectors also be determined, the consequences also be determined by the field of view that you have, whether you be a sector or looking at a particular thematic area, and of course, uncertainty. So why does risk information matter? We've got to be able to understand our risk. We've got to be able to anticipate, to avoid, to be able to transfer that risk if needed, or to be, and first and foremost, to be able to prepare and respond. And some of the discussions that will actually happen today will talk to this. Now, I'm glad to say that for the Pacific region, science and technology has actually placed us in a greater stance to better understand these current and future risks. And part of this is what Stephen actually talked to around better resolution data. better access to remote sensed data, being able to actually look back in time to look at what what we can learn from history in terms of impact. And then what are we actually able to foresee and calibrate based on forecast models. And so this is really allowing us to not just think about what could we have done differently, but to really plan ahead, to be able to forecast and to be able to actually think about where development needs to go. If you look at the events that have actually affected the Pacific region, it's quite astounding that in 2019, a report actually commissioned by UNESCAP indicates that for tropical cyclones alone for the Pacific SIDS, small and developing states, pardon me, the annual average loss as a result of tropical cyclones was about 533 million USD. Now you compare that to the development assistance that the region is also receiving. And when you compare those numbers, that's about a quarter of development assistance for the Pacific. And if you look at the impact that disasters have had in the region, and I'm just talking about disasters here, which would have its climate change implications, the impact on GDP is also astounding. And when you compare the impact on GDP with the aid to GDP ratio, what we're finding is that the loss that countries are actually faced with as a result of disasters is actually outpacing what development assistance is able to provide. And if I take a case in point, if we look at the Vanuatu earthquake from last year, the impact on GDP was about 17% for Vanuatu. The aid to GDP ratio for Vanuatu is about 18 to 23%. So it's not a small, it's not an insignificant number here that we're comparing. So how do we actually change that around? How do we turn all of these negative statistics that we've been seeing for the Pacific to look at how do we actually make some changes? And I'm glad to say that the panel who get on after me are going to be talking about some of this investment and how these investments are actually generating and effecting change, that they're also addressing some of the underlying risks that we often don't factor into when discussing development or even risk information. So these are concerns that we talk about relating to disaster-related displacement. Where do people go to? And are the places that they're going to safe? Are they actually in areas that we understand what the risk profile is for them? For vulnerable groups, we already know that disasters deepen poverty and expose gaps in how our support systems and social protection is actually quite difficult. So how do we ensure that these households are actually supported at the point in time when they're most needed? So that it's not always after the fact that this support can actually be done beforehand. And if you can probably figure out that when we're talking about risk information isn't just about information that you're generating and producing to make a change or a difference to today and for the future. It can also influence the support that we're providing, so that the support that we're providing can actually be preemptive and can actually allow communities to self-determine what they need to do to be able to ensure that they're actually safer. We need to ensure that the risk information that we're generating is indeed findable, that it is accessible, that we can actually use it and reuse it. And this, of course, means that the right people need to be able to have access to this, and that they can actually access this information that in a timely manner, that is effective, and it actually allows us to make decisions that are inclusive. The strategic partnerships that Rachel talked about between ADB and the Pacific community, these partnerships with the Pacific Resilience Partnership membership. So these partners actually allow us to look at what are the scope of things that we're actually doing and how can we actually start to pull some of the resourcing together so that the risk information that we're generating is not just fulfilling a need for now, but is also being able to inform other specific investments that that are going to be needed. What I would like to add with, to end with is, I talk a lot about what we're actually producing in terms of science and observations and modeling and calculations. The reality is that there's a whole depth of knowledge and information out there that we're actually not probably incorporating well enough. And this is really through our communities, that the science and observations are actually brought to the forefront, and that we're actually starting to incorporate them into risk-informed decisions, but also in terms of their own decisions and development. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Litea. You've provided a lot of food for thought. And I think our esteemed panelists that are with us today will cover a lot of these topics as well. But thank you for also highlighting especially the need, the accessibility needs that we have to data and information, but also using and reusing what we have already. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, just so I can introduce our esteemed panelists properly. So for those that are attending now and may have registered last week, you would have seen four panelists as part of this webinar series. But I'm happy to let you know that we also we have an additional one from Tuvalu, which we were able to secure and confirm just late last night as well. So if I can just confirm that you can see my screen as it is now. If somebody could just give me a quick thumbs up, please. Okay, I see a couple of hands raised. That's an innovative way to give a thumbs up. Thank you so much, everyone. So I'm pleased to introduce Johnny Nimau, who is the Senior Monitoring and Evaluation Officer and the Partner 2 Country Coordinator for the Government of Vanuatu. So Johnny is here with us online. Lisa Kingsbury, who is the Director for the Strategic Communication, Outreach and Engagement Unit at the Pacific Community, SPC. Thank you so much, Lisa, for being online. Luca Sella, who is the Director for the National Disaster Management Office at the Government of Tuvalu. Thank you so much, Luca, for availing your time this morning. Gabrielle Emery, who is the head of the Pacific Sub-Regional Office for the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, who is also with us online today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen as I begin to ask our esteemed panelists their questions as it evolves throughout this webinar series. So the first question is to Director Luca from Tuvalu. Could you share an example where a risk assessment or assessments or data was used and applied in a national context? Thank you, Director. Over to you.
Aloha, everyone. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I think from Tuvalu's perspective for the past couple of years, we have been engaging quite well with the climate change department with regards to the development of a integrated vulnerability assessment, which was, I guess, completed in 2022. This was part of the initiative that looks at the most cross-cutting sectors in terms of climate change and disaster risk. So I guess there's several methodologies which were used during when we had the assessment. That includes desktop and scientific studies, national consultation. There's field work and participatory community engagement, focusing on 7 specific sectors, which is water security, energy security, income security, ecosystem health, food security, infrastructure, and community health. So these were parts of the risk assessments that were supported, I guess, also as part of the program under complementing the program under the TCAP. So I guess the outcome of the IVA, or the Integrated Vulnerability Assessment, was able to inform some of the new developments with the cross-cutting sectors. Example, the water and sanitation, which I believe SPC has some of the programs have been implemented in the country, which were informed from those developments were informed from the IVA risk assessment. Just as of last year, we had focus on infrastructure vulnerability risks, assessing the evacuation shelters, designated evacuation shelters, which was supported under the World Bank. So we concluded this last year,
Director Luca, just to let you know, oh, do we have you back, Director?
yes.
Okay, great. Apologies, you were just breaking up a little bit, but please continue. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, so building on from that evacuation shelter assessment is we're looking at intervention costs to improve the capabilities of the designated evacuation shelters for any future emergency. So that's part of an ongoing initiative, and also we have the report, which we could also share with you. Um, Aligned to that, also there's coastal hazard modeling with UNDP under the TCAP project, which is also an ongoing uh, training and capacity building program with the government of Tuvalu. This is building the capabilities within government agencies, especially NDMO, climate change, and also meteorological service office in Tuvalu. So that's one of the ongoing programs with the hazard coastal hazard modeling, and also integrating inundation into those training programs. Um, Maybe just want to highlight one, I guess it's also one of the progress that we are trying, and with the support of Australia Assist through the deployment of our technical advisor. We're trying to build on from the previous disaster and post-disaster needs assessment and recovery plans to build on the network between, I guess, the increasing investment with World Bank and ADB with regards to the KTDOs and contingent disaster funds. This is part of the conversations from, I guess, the historical impact of disaster which have affected the country. This will help to elevate the Tuvalu profile and future investment for for finance and fund to assist the countries in times of crisis, and especially with long-term recovery when there's a crisis or disaster affecting the country. Yes, I think those are some of uh, the risk uh, informations that uh, we have collected and collated, consolidated as well. There's also online platform that this assessment report can be accessed, and I do believe that there's still ongoing conversations and dialogue on future programs with SPC and also other regional organizations. But yes, I think this what have been and what we have been engaging in the past few years, and I guess drawing closer to the conversation that we had in Samoa with the loss and damage, Pacific loss and damage dialogue. I guess there's huge investment as well with the building an enabling environment for loss and damage to happen in the country. And there's also aspects of risk information discussions within the loss and damage agenda. So hopefully, for when this is become effective, we Tuvalu, I guess, will draw more closer to be able to, I guess, reach out for technical assistance under the Santiago network, and building on from that loss and damage, we could look at, I guess, enhancing the risk informations and training needs for the country to be able to elevate some of I guess the risk information so profiles that we'll need for future development. I think that's it from my side, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Director. Very insightful thoughts as well, looking at short-term to longer-term sort of recovery and planning as well with the risk information that's currently available for Tuvalu. We will follow up with you following this call. So I think you've mentioned a couple of reports as well as a repository that we would also like to share with registrants on this call as well. So we'll follow up with you following this webinar. Thank you so much, Director. My next question is to you, Lisa. What makes risk information credible and useful for decision making? Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the region. I think one of the key things that makes risk information credible is ownership and authenticity. And so I think, really understanding some of these critical elements at the beginning of risk-informed information and the development of that information is really important. What I would like to do is I'll just share my screen and take you through a couple of key points, but really I want to tell you a bit of a story. And so stepping back, when we think about communications in the development sector, you're probably immediately thinking press release or a social media post or, something along those lines. They're tools that are used to get information out there, but the actual anchoring of effective, meaningful, impactful communications is a real technical skill set. And some of the best storytellers in the world are of and from the Pacific region. And so how are we ensuring that we're finding ways to translate information that is really critical around disaster and risk information to communities in ways that they're engaging with it, or ways that countries can use it to drive increased access to resourcing or finance? And so there's a couple of key things that I'm going to take you through, and that I've been privileged to be a part of bigger teams within SVC and with my colleagues around how we help translate some of that information in different ways. So when we think about information and the way people absorb information from a scientific lens, visual representation is actually proven to support decision makers in engaging with that information. Now, that doesn't mean a page of spreadsheets or an Excel spreadsheet or lots of numbers. It means really thinking through who that audience is and what it is that you need them to take, because there's so much going on. What's the message and what's the key position? The other work that we've done around evidence is that comprehension of science or technical or difficult or complex things really is supported by visual representation. And so really taking the time to think this through, but not for you as the technical person, but for the audience that you're working with. And that could be political, that could be international, that could be community. It depends on where you're looking as to how you pivot things. On average, individuals deal with about 35,000 decisions daily. So, you know, we're targeted with from what to eat, what to wear, what, you know, time to go to our meeting or whatever that looks like. And so finding ways to realize that you're competing with everything else that's happening in somebody's world. How do you get information through in a way that cuts through to inform decisions in appropriate ways? Because at its core, science on a shelf is not effective. How do we ensure that it's being used and guided and led by community in meaningful ways? One of the key things around the climate debate, as you all very well know, is that, you know, there is a lot of misinformation and intentional disinformation around this sector itself. But there's really solid information showing that failure to communicate clearly is one of the biggest challenges around the climate change action and commitment process. And so these smokes and mirrors that can sometimes be very intentional make it very difficult for people to engage in the process. The final key thing before I get into the story and how we've used this in a way, you know, in these methodologies and approaches, is really thinking about who speaks and who is represented. So, you know, if you're going into community to talk to them about risk information, unless it's my community, I'm not really the right person to be doing that. And so what's the work? It doesn't devalue you in any way, but what is the best approach and who are the best people to represent those things? When it comes to representing the realities of things like climate change in the region, in the Marshall Islands or in Tuvalu, Tuvaluans and Marshallese peoples are best placed, and it's their reality and their story. And so ensuring that we're thinking through that representation is really important. It's as important as the information that you're giving. Language and other things obviously is critical. This is just a photo to really show how important that representation is. This was at COP in Dubai. And this is the modelling that I'll take you through around how we've embedded these approaches and is being presented to a room of people that would never have engaged on this discussion otherwise. But because it was being led by Tuvalu on their own environment, talking about their impacts and reality, it allowed, you know, this kind of engagement. And as you can see, there's, you know, not everyone was very attentive to the discussion. So what does this look like as a practical example? Because when we say comms, it's very easy to think about it at the end of the chain. But what we're trying to encourage is the recognition of this being an important skill set at the very beginning, just like you'd have a climate scientist or a disaster risk specialist, you know, really thinking through your outreach and engagement at the very start, thinking about resources. There's a range of methodologies that sit within this space. This one is kind of how we usually approach it more broadly, and this isn't specific to the region. This is, you know, more broadly within the broader sector. We think about how we can explain, how we enlighten, or how we engage. And so we bring together things like human stories and data or visuals and data, but we don't necessarily get the entire lens. What evidence shows the change element that drives a level of change is the combination of those three. So anchoring it in human narrative, anchoring it in storytelling, having visuals that connect, and also data that is accurate. And so it's not about dumbing anything down or simplifying or having inaccuracy. It's about taking the time to actually translate it. And, you know, recent studies have found that 63% of decision makers remember stories. They remember connection, as you do. Only 5% remember static information. And so, you know, this is really important, particularly in the next decade, in terms of the challenges that we face in the region. So it's bringing together data, visualization, narrative, and that human connection, which brings the whole piece together, which is incredibly solid. This is the process and methodology that we developed with countries in our work for the International Court of Justice advisory opinion on state obligations in respect to climate change. We had worked on the development of translating technical modelling, which is incredible work, and working to then translate it in ways that were tactile, that people could understand and engage with in a different lens. And so Director Luca actually touched on some of the modelling that we have worked with and on with science teams. And so this is an example of, you know, what it looks like in the system, and is incredibly important in terms of the decision making and the guidance that this work is providing around risk, climate adaptation, around inundation and impact. What we then did is worked with the scientific team to develop a methodology to oh, hang on, I've jumped ahead a slide. So to create a methodology that allowed us to then translate it into a tactile tool. And the purpose of this tool was to actually get disaster ministers to understand the importance of preparedness funding and investing in preparedness to reduce the impact at the end of a disaster. This model here is the one that was the original. So this is the very first model we designed and worked with the technical teams and the country representatives with. This is Kathy Jetnil-Kitchener, who's the climate envoy for the Marshall Islands. And we were unfortunately in New York with very limited space, so having to teach this on a bed in a hotel room before she took this to the International Tribunal for Law of the Sea to present as part of the oral hearings on the impacts of climate change. And so this piece of work helped translate that narrative in a meaningful way, bringing together the narrative, the data, and also the visuals in a way that was human and anchored. And so the judges really responded very well to this. What we then did is continue to work on this translation with this methodology as core. And so working to actually translate, you know, what does a disaster look like before sea level rise, which you can see on the left, and the blue water around the edge. But then what does it look like under a 25 centimetre sea level rise scenario, a 1 in 10 year event, for example? And so when we say those things to people that aren't in the technical space, it can be hard. So what we then did is we were asked to support, as the regional organisation with the mandate in human rights, in gender equality and in youth, we were asked to support the countries in terms of as a secretariat alongside the International Court of Justice process. And so we worked with 13 countries. We worked with youth representation to ensure that they were front and centre, noting that's one of our mandates, and we take a people-centred design approach. We helped develop testimonial evidence. So we worked with communities in places like Tuvalu, Kiribati, Fiji, to collect evidence and data that was human, that could be presented in the cases and also presented in the court. We also helped provide access to the science papers and everything else that were in SPC. Obviously, that was our scientific team, but we brought them together to get that information down to national levels. We then also integrated the science and the storytelling elements with the legal support. And we ran training for presenters who were presenting in the court. And we realised that only 2 of 13 countries were planning to present in the court to the ICJ because, you know, travel to the court is expensive. We had to resource mobilise to get access to that funding. We then did that around representation and authenticity, and then we worked with the Attorney General's offices and other teams to ensure that they felt they had the tools they needed to present in these spaces. And in the end, we had all 13 countries that were presenting as Pacific Island countries to the court themselves. A lot of their lawyers had been saying, you know, we should present because we know the court process. But really representing that authenticity made a massive impact. And a lot of the sea level rise modelling and data visualization in the models helped articulate this to the judges. And so this is a small video on one of the impacts of the video, of the evidence being presented in this way from one of the top legal experts for the Marshall Islands and Vanuatu. Oh, sorry. Well, so I think, to wrap up, I think really thinking through representation, authenticity, putting investment at the front. So, when it came to the submission and when it came to engagement with our team, we were actively engaged from the very beginning. We were supporting countries in translating their legal submissions to make sense of them. We were working on translating the science with countries as well as with our technical teams. And we were helping in terms of how you then articulate that in the appropriate ways. And so, all in all, the cost, just to that level of commitment was around 310,000 New Zealand dollars. And we resource mobilized for that funding to invest in this work. Most was spent on bringing the countries together and getting the countries to The Hague, as well as some of these visual tools. And so really, when you are putting these programs together, seeing this as a technical skill set at the outset and having it in an advisory role at the very beginning is critical. Comprehension is critical. It doesn't have to be exactly the right way in terms of science language. It does for the scientists. It doesn't for the politicians and for the community. But understanding it and really allowing that to be owned by countries is critical. And then having that diversity in decision making from the start. But most importantly, I think the thing that we've learned and the thing that we all need to step back and even ourselves need to think about is make it human. Whose story is this? Let it be owned by them in authentic ways, but create the avenues that support that and the funding and the resources that actually ensure that those tools are supported and accessible for communities in meaningful ways. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This has really highlighted a lot of, about the why and how we do things, utilizing risk information. It's great to see the emphasis on the involvement of communications professionals at the onset instead of further down the value chain. So thank you as well for highlighting that. We will now be going to Johnny from Vanuatu. Johnny, your question is, what are the most common knowledge gaps and where do they exist regarding the use or application of risk data and information in Vanuatu? Thank you. Over to you, Johnny. Johnny, just letting you know that your mic is on mute. Apologies.
Thank you, Rachel. Risk index, Vanuatu is ranked as one of the most vulnerable placed with multiple assets. And in Vanuatu, understanding risk information is for resilience development is shaped around countries' diverse assets with limited resources and a strength of reliance on both
This is always the interesting part about hosting
asset
online
maps,
events. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Johnny.
Asset informations. Sorry.
Your screen just froze for a second. Don't worry. Carry on. Thank you.
Yes, by combining some of the asset science and local validations that can be communicated into Bislama, the national dialogue. Vanuatu ensures that risk information is accessible, trusted, and applied at national level, provincial level, and as well as the community level to strengthen resilience and guide sustainable development. For disaster and climate change risk information within the IKM system, some of the focused area is through the information management, traditional knowledge sharing, lessons learned, data analysis and research, as well as the risk assessments. Clarifying some of the components within the use of data action is through the data collections to identify where the information is coming from, which is through the survey, remote sensing, asset models, and community knowledge. And also the data translations and communications, how complex the data is, simplified into maps, briefs, and advisories that people can understand, as well as the decision making and actions pathway in terms of who receives the data, how it links to an existing SOPs, and the city TRR, climate plans, sectoral ministries, as well as the budget or support mechanisms that can be triggered. The type of assessments that the country usually have is, well, there's a lot of assessments. For example, the vulnerability and capacity assessments, the risk assessments, damage and loss assessments, rapid need assessments, and the environment climate impact assessments, food security assessments, monitoring, and etc. Well, in terms of the assessments after the hazard strike, some of the assessments that we usually do is through the initial assessments, rapid technical assessments, then sectoral assessments. Mostly sectoral assessments inform the recovery in terms of the post-disaster needs. This is where the recovery after the response came in to support in terms of a program at the program level in terms of recovery. Some of the credibility the VMGT, photometeorology and geohazards, as well as the climate and other UN agency or NGOs. Some of the informations can be captured into like the local validations, communications review that can confirm data to relevant like maps, different products that are produced to impacts and triggers to build the ownership which they can own to sustain their resilience through the informations that they have in terms of risk informations. The other one is the transparency, which clearly explains some of the limitations and assumptions through uncertainty that different levels of the informations can be translate to some of the unreliable sources that can be transparent into different sources. And the other one is the alignment of informations that clear assessments can fit directly into existing frameworks. For example, the Sentai framework, the NDC, the NAP, as well as the FRTP and the NSTP at country level. And also communication using Pislama or visual informations like tools, either through the products of mapping, infography, and brief page that can simplify some of the informations that can increase trust, take. And this can also be applied in the track recordings that can also show some of the previous cases that where data can be lead to
Johnny, go ahead.
Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we've got you here. Thank you.
Yeah. So most of the assessments were done by the National Disaster Management Office for immediate response. Once it shifts to the long term through recovery, some of the informations that inform the recovery unit is through the sectoral assessments that can inform the post-disaster or the post plans for the recovery. And most of these informations or the recovery, it's to the support of projects to inform decision making planning that can provide tools. For example, partner project that provide some of the tools in terms of the risk tools, and also through the support of SPC in providing some of the trainings that users can use across the sectors to collect the data and analyze it and come up to some of the meaningful and sound uh, informations that can provide a sound decision making to inform better plannings and better developments to address response and the recovery. So I think that's it from my side, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Johnny, for those insights. Apologies, we did lose you a couple of times during your talk, but I did capture a few points as well. But thank you to you and to our audience for being patient with us. Our next question goes to Luca again, Director Luca from Tuvalu. In the case of Tuvalu, what are the biggest barriers that you have seen or that you're aware of that happen when applying risk information into real-world planning or investment decisions? Thank you. Over to you, Director.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. I think some of the barriers that and the challenges that we are trying
Director, apologies. We have lost audio for you at this point in time. We will give you a couple more seconds to see if you can reconnect. But I think in the interest of time, if we're not able to get you back in a couple of seconds, we will continue the session, if that's okay with you. Maybe if you could just give me a thumbs up, Director Luca, or if any of your colleagues on this call as well could just give me a thumbs up as well. We understand that you're also joining us from as part of your annual leave. So we also just want to thank you for that too. Director Luca, are you able to hear us or see us on this call, on this webinar? Okay, I understand, Director Luca, you are having issues with your connection. We will have questions for you. We will have another rapid fire round of questions for all our panelists following the Mentimeter exercise. So please don't worry. There will be more opportunity for you to share your insights. I do have one of your colleagues, Director Luca, online, Lemao Afamasanga, who will be able to quickly speak on your behalf. Lemao, please, over to you. Thank you. Orisi, could I just ask for your help to make to enable her audio, please?
Yep, if she can, Lemo, if you can just accept in order to become a panelist.
This is always one of the tricky parts with doing online webinars. We have to face the unpredictability of our technology and connection issues. But thank you everyone for being patient. It's important that we try and get through this as best we can and reflect practical and national challenges and issues as well. So thank you, Lemao. Are you able to speak to us now?
Hey, just testing to see if you can hear me okay.
We can hear you. Thank you, Lemao.
So we did have a late night going through some of these questions with Director Lucas. I'll try my best. I know that he will say it better, but there are a few things that we're still trying to address in terms of addressing of the challenges that we're continuing to face in regards to translation, as well as the use of information and risk analysis for decision making, as well as for development. One of which is in the earlier stages, as Director Luca had alluded to, is the administration part of it. I think the government of Tuvalu realized earlier on that there are a lot of assessments and information that are happening in the country, but there is no centralized system to manage it. And where decision makers and development partners can go to and fish out the latest information that is available for Tuvalu, and using those for planning, as well as developing the areas in the different sectors that he had mentioned earlier. So with the gap of having a centralized repository system where all the risk information goes into, I think the work that ADB as well as the SPC through the Integrated Pacifica, as well as the Pacific Resilience Support Program for the region and for Tuvalu, is addressing some of those. Lisa rightfully said that the translation is one of the key things, and having scientific information that continues to be presented in a complicated and technical manner is always the barrier for Tuvaluans politicians to see through what is needed to be prioritized. So for the assistance and the work of all the development partners, as well as the leadership from within the ministries, both climate change as well as the National Disaster Management Office, is trying to break down some of these technicalities and using what's available to promote a positive environment where politicians, as well as the leaders of the day, can look at the information that is available and make sense of it, and personalize it to the point where they can champion as well some of these decisions and moving it forward for whether it's advocating for resources or for planning at the national level. And then at the same time, trying to breach the gap between what we understand at the national level to the community level, so that when they too see the information, it makes sense. So yeah, he had just come back on, and I think I mentioned two of the key critical challenges that we continue to have. As you know, political will is one of the biggest area where we need to ensure that information are sent through and are sensitized as well. And I think with the help of some of the development partners in understanding how we can articulate that better within the political structure and the political seating, we have been able to ensure that not only within Tuvalu, but across the region and also international platforms, that the consistent messaging is done well. And I think those are the three main challenges that possibly we could share at this time. So the ability to understand what is important and prioritization, as well as having avoiding duplications through establishing a national repository system where all these risk analysis is a work in progress for Tuvalu, and then continuing on the advocacy role, not only within the country, but across the region and international, is something that we're continuing to work on to address the challenges that I have mentioned earlier. I don't know if Director Luca, you want to add anything else?
Thanks, Lemao. And also hence why we have you to support to build the capabilities within our office. I guess that's one of the barriers as well, is trying to build the capabilities in the office, and also the confidence that, when there's in times of crisis, and also for future investments and opportunities, we have to be quite confident on. I mean, the level of confidence has to be in the office, and allow us to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Limao, as well as those interventions.
Right.
Apologies.
Rachel's back on.
My internet, I am back on. My internet actually went off as well. Apologies. We just had a blackout, a power outage in Samoa. But happy to let you know that I am back online, and I will continue this session. Apologies if I did miss out on anything that you said following that, Director Luca, but thank you again, Mal, for stepping in on his behalf as well. Our last question as part of this panel session goes to Gabrielle from UNDRA. So Gabrielle, I know that UNDRA is heavily involved in risk information applications around the region, as well as early warning systems. Looking at your role in terms of early warning systems, if you could improve one key aspect of how risk information is integrated into these types of systems, what would it be and why? Thank you, Gabrielle. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Greetings, fellow panelists and audience. Yeah, I think my job's made really easy because I think all the other participants, the other panelists are speaking so eloquently on some of the barriers and also some of the solutions for our risk information and communication. But I certainly want to stress that, we really do need to start moving beyond data for data's sake, and really putting the emphasis now on how we are applying and how we are using that data for better decision making. I think Lisa really showed some really innovative ways. And, you know, if we could be looking at, you know, how we're communicating risk across all of the different facets and areas we work, because ultimately we want to be using this risk information to inform our actions. So I think if there's one thing of how we would want to see our risk assessments being used is that they're generating action, particularly in our early warning work. So yeah, I think as we're moving beyond the scientific data collection and looking, you know, only at hazards, but we really need to be thinking about the exposure and the vulnerability angles as well, interlaying some of that hazard information onto what will be the impacts on people, onto the environment, and therefore also communicating then what actions need to be taken as well. So I think we saw some really, you know, innovative ways this was being applied. We heard about before, you know, COVID was a big wake-up call, and I think we saw a lot of wonderful risk communication happening around COVID, around the public health measures, what people need to be doing and how they need to be taking action. We're seeing also a lot more emphasis now in the early warning work on the region as well, really looking at, you know, this kind of pillar 3 to the pillar 4, if you're familiar with the early warning value chain, but really looking at how we now apply risk information to actions, a lot more inclusion, engagement of different types of people in terms of designing these systems, persons with disability, women, young people, elderly. So we also need to be thinking about disasters and their social dimensions as well. And going back to this kind of area of risk information, I think, you know, as I said, we need to stop just the only focus on risk collection and collection of information. We've seen a lot of development of, you know, regional platforms for data platforms, a lot of risk assessments being undertaken by partners, by CSOs. And while, you know, that is good, we have to also move this to the next level as well. How are we investing in the next level of this application? And really importantly, how is all of this information that we're being used and generated, how is this coming together? We heard Tavalu speaking about the importance of moving towards, you know, national leadership, national sovereignty, the central repository system, which is, you know, wonderful. So how can we support these kind of efforts as well? And then how can we also support that application of those decisions? I think the person element of data collection and coordination really needs, and data governance really needs some careful consideration in the region, that we're still in a position in many countries that they need MOUs between lots of different government ministries just to be able to share, you know, some basic risk information. So I think we really need to look at our data governance, how this information can be more readily shared horizontally and vertically across the countries as well. So I think that's something we really do need to emphasize as well. And in terms of, you know, where we are globally across this issue, risk information is a central component of disaster risk reduction efforts. We know it's a key priority area of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction in priority area 1. It's also one of the target areas as well of the 7 targets of the Sendai framework around risk information and early warning systems. Obviously, we're still not where we should be globally. Our disaster risk is still outstripping our disaster risk reduction efforts. And so therefore, you know, we've got this connection issue of, you know, how we're understanding our disaster risk, which definitely, as we heard, is getting a lot better. We've got our science and technology innovations on our side, but then how we're applying that, how that's being used for more risk-informed investments, risk-informed planning across the sectors, there's still a disconnect there. So yeah, I think this would really be our push in the remaining 5 years of Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, moving beyond data collection to supporting risk communication and risk application. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle, for that intervention as well. I'd just like to note that we are running a little bit short on time. So our next session, our next part of this webinar today, we will go straight into a 1 minute or less reflection from each of our panelists on the call today. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen very quickly, and I am keeping the video off just in case the network drops again. Apologies for the technical issues. It's something that we have to be agile and work with as much as possible when doing these sorts of things. So I'd like to quickly pass back to Johnny as well. If there's one key takeaway that you would like to leave with the audience today, what would it be in 1 minute or less, please, Johnny? Thank you. Johnny, do we still have you online? Okay, let's go ahead. We can circle back to Johnny. Are you there?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Thank you.
No problem. Go ahead.
The key takeaways here is one is the rich information, is valuable only when actionable. In translating some of the technical data into, the local dialogues with brief, like for example, map clear triggers makes it more usable for the area councils or within the vulnerable people, and also to uptake some of the best way when we impact some of the institutionals like uh, the ministries, provincial structures that must be integrate their data into the existing SOPs, sectoral plans and budgets, and also some of the local validations that build trust through communications that accept some of the act on the risk data when it is co-produced when with traditional or custom or churches that can be validate to suit their needs, and as well as challenges remains frequent in terms of data systems and etc. Limit capacity, and I think some of the also to enable some of the conditions such in key to strengthen policies frameworks. For example, the CCTRR, NAB, and also the national frameworks, and also some of the accessible tools that can be used like the COPO, QGIS, the open source, the SMS alerts for information sharing, and as well as some of the sustainabilities in them that requires investments without the national budget allocations to inform some of the platforms and the community mapping that often disappeared after projects ends. So these are some of the things that I might leave it as a takeaway. Thank you. I'll leave it here.
Thank you so much, Johnny, for that final intervention. Director Lisa, I'd like to give you the floor just for your less than 1 minute key takeaway for the audience, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Look, I think seeing strategic communications as a advisory mechanism and, making and allowing it and that technical area to guide and advise how we translate this information at the very outset of any risk information is really critical for everyone and for communities. And really investing in it. So putting that funding in your project proposals, making sure that it's not about visibility and putting a logo somewhere, making sure it's about understanding how people are using the information, accessing it and able to access it in critical times, or understand it to inform decisions is really the key takeaway that I think has come through. We now have a lot of the work. We have a lot of the understanding. How do we make sure we're using that in meaningful ways? And so thank you very much for the discussion and the opportunity, and any questions, more than happy to oblige.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that. Director Luca, we'd like to give you this opportunity as well, just for a final key takeaway for the.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. And I think from our side, what is critical is the risk information, as I guess Johnny has said, that will inform future investments, especially with ongoing programs with IDA, the new IDA under the World Bank. It's also one of the investments that we are also invested in. And not only that, is with the current the future development with the cross-cutting sectors. As I've said earlier, with the vulnerability assessment, we're trying to engage with partners to, especially with ongoing developments with adaptation programs and TCAP. And not only that, it is community resilience program that we would like to see this investment from our partners. So the risk informations and the benchmark that we are trying to work on is very key and important to inform all any future opportunities for Tuvalu. And I guess through this conversation, we're able to build on from, I guess, learning from others and also formalize this with any future conversations that we have, whether it's national or regional. I think it's very important that we have this conversation and learning from each other. I think that's it, and thank you for uh, having us participate in this panel and meeting. After
Thank you so much, Director Luca, and thank you for raising the regional sharing mechanisms as well. I'm sure that's something that will be continuously explored in these events moving forward. Gabrielle, I'd like to pass over back to you again, just for a quick key takeaway for our audience on the call. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think our key messages would be looking at how we step up our coordination, our communication, and our application of our risk information. Coordination, we talked about the need to bring the partners, the donors across government, the information that's being collected by our non-government actors together. Communication, Lisa covered it, looking at how we really invest in that next level of the strategic communication. And I think once we've done that, then it's going to be making our application of that risk information and being able to understand it in a much more personal way and apply it to our decision making a lot easier, and we will have better action. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle, for that. And I like that you highlighted the personalization of risk information moving forward. Also something that Lisa alluded to as well during her presentation. Thank you so much. Litea, we'd like to give the floor to you now for a 1 minute, less than 1 minute, quick reflection and key takeaway for the audience that is still with us on this call. Thank you so much. Over to you, Litea.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you very much to the panelists who've gone ahead of me. What we've realized over the last 2 decades of doing this is, if the decision makers who are actually receiving the products that they're meant to be determining a course of action on, if they don't understand what that risk is, then it's very difficult for them to make that determination. So you've got to be able to communicate in a language or translate in a language that they can understand. And this means that for finance people, that you're talking in the currencies that they understand, monetary terms. For urban planners, that they're also able to understand what this means in terms of future development and what it means for the development consent process. And for the individual, the decisions that they're making when they're receiving an early warning message is not going to put them in greater harm, that it's actually going to be safer for them in terms of the decisions that they make. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Litea, as well, and highlighting the communal and personal risk decisions that we also need to make on a daily basis. Thank you again. To the audience that is still with us online, we did have a evaluation session, but unfortunately, due to time constraints, we are going to have to skip it a little bit. We will share this with you on emails as well, so please look out for the evaluation in your inboxes coming soon. Just to highlight the next steps, so as mentioned earlier when we started this webinar, this is a series of webinars moving forward. So thank you so much to those that have stuck with us throughout the event today. We have completed our event 1 for August 2025. Our second event will be held at the end of September. The focus will be looking at improving risk data and insights through access, tools, and innovation. So we hope that you'll join us as well for the second iteration of the webinar series with us that we will be hosting towards the end of next month. More information will be shared with all of you online. We will be consolidating any presentations and any information that the panelists have shared through during their discussions today.